Hello, and a huge welcome to the channel. If you're looking for cross-dressing stories that are emotional, intriguing, and truly empowering, you've come to the right place. The day it all started was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays are trash day in our neighborhood, and the grinding roar of the garbage truck was the first thing I heard when I woke up. The second was Marcus, humming off-key in the kitchen. We weren't exactly friends. Marcus and we were roommates. Thrown together by the brutal economics of city living and a mutual acquaintance who'd skipped town. He was an artist. Or called himself one, which meant he spent most of his time brooding over canvases and leaving passive-aggressive notes about the recycling. I was a junior analyst at a finance firm, which meant my life was a spreadsheet of predictable outcomes. Or so I thought. Morning. Sunshine. He chirped as I stumbled into the kitchen, my tie already slung loosely around my neck. A mug was sitting on the counter, steam curling from its rim. Made you a coffee. New blend. Some fancy single origin stuff. I grunted my thanks. Grabbing the mug. Marcus was never this cheerful. And he certainly never made coffee for me. We had a silent, unspoken agreement. I paid a bigger chunk of the rent, and he stayed out of my way. This deviation from the norm should have been a red flag, but my brain was still booting up for the day. I took a long sip. It was awful. There was the familiar, earthy bitterness of coffee, but underneath it lay something else, a strange, cloying sweetness with an almost chemical tang. I grimaced. "Whoa, that's different," I managed to say. Marcus leaned against the doorframe, a smirk playing on his lips that I couldn't quite decipher. Good different. Just strong, I said. Deciding not to engage, I was already running late. I chugged half of it, the weird aftertaste coating my tongue, and rinsed the mug. As I grabbed my briefcase, I saw him watching me, that same mysterious smile fixed on his face. It was unsettling. But I had a quarterly report to finalize. I didn't have time for whatever weird mood he was in. The changes started so subtly, I didn't even recognize them as a pattern. A week later, I was watching a dumb action movie, the kind where the hero makes a noble sacrifice at the end, and I felt my throat tighten. My eyes welled up. I blinked furiously, embarrassed even though I was alone in my apartment. I hadn't cried during a movie since I was a kid watching The Lion King. I brushed it off as stress. Work had been a killer lately. Then came the physical things. A couple of weeks after the coffee incident, I noticed a strange tenderness in my chest. It felt like a deep bruise on both sides, right around my pecs. I must have pulled a muscle at the gym, I told myself. Even though I hadn't been to the gym in a month, I'd try to sleep on my stomach and the dull ache would wake me up. My skin started changing. Too. I didn't see it at first, not until one morning when I was shaving. The razor seemed to glide more smoothly than usual. I paused and ran my fingers over my cheek. It felt softer, less rough. I leaned into the mirror, inspecting my face. The lines around my eyes seemed a little less pronounced. It was bizarre. I chalked it up to a new face wash I'd bought, a fancy one that was probably full of moisturizers. The muscle loss was the most unnerving. I used to be able to haul the 24-pack of bottled water from the car to our third-floor apartment in one go, one Saturday. I grabbed the case and my arms trembled. I had to stop on the second-floor landing, my biceps burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. It was humiliating. I felt weak, drained. I was getting older. I reasoned. Almost 30. This is what happens. Your body starts to betray you. Each change had a plausible, if slightly flimsy. Explanation. My mind was working overtime to build a wall of denial, brick by logical brick. The wall began to crack on a Monday morning. I was getting dressed for work, pulling a crisp, white button-down shirt from my closet. It was one of my favorites, a slim fit cut that always made me feel sharp and put together. But as I buttoned it up, something was wrong. The fabric was tight across my chest, pulling at the buttons. I looked down and saw, with a jolt of confusion, the distinct outline of my nipples pushing against the cotton. It wasn't just a faint impression, it was a clear, defined shape. My heart started to pound. I stood in front of the full-length mirror on my closet door, my hands hovering over my chest. I could see it. There was a fullness there that hadn't existed before. It wasn't fat. I'd gained a few pounds before, and it always went to my gut. This was different. This was localized, firm. It looked like the start of breasts. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. This was impossible. This was insane. I ripped the shirt off, my breath catching in my throat. It was just weight gain. That's all it was. I was eating too much takeout, not getting enough exercise. It was just a weird way my body was storing fat. I grabbed a different shirt, a looser one, and put it on without looking in the mirror again. I fled the apartment that morning, skipping the coffee Marcus had once again left on the counter. But the denial, my carefully constructed fortress, was crumbling. The seed of a terrifying, impossible thought had been planted, and it was starting to grow. The final, catastrophic collapse came a week later. It was a Thursday night. Marcus was out, his studio space mercifully empty and silent. I had just gotten out of the shower, a towel wrapped around my waist. I avoided the mirror, as I had been doing for days. But I caught a glimpse of my reflection out of the corner of my eye as I walked past. I stopped. My whole body went rigid. Slowly, as if being controlled by someone else, I turned to face the mirror. I let the towel drop to the floor, and I looked. It wasn't my imagination. It wasn't weight gain. My chest was undeniably, shockingly different. The tender, sore areas had developed into distinct mounds of tissue. They were small, maybe filling an A cup at most, but they were unmistakably breasts. My areolas had darkened and grown wider, and the nipple area was puffy and pronounced. It was the kind of chest development you see in a teenage girl just starting puberty. I lifted a trembling hand and touched one side. The flesh was sensitive, yielding. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over me. I stumbled back, hitting the wall, my legs suddenly too weak to hold me. I slid down to the cool tile floor, my head in my hands. The world had tilted on its axis. The man I knew, the body I had lived in for 29 years, was being systematically erased and replaced by someone else. The bitter taste of that long-ago coffee filled my mouth, and for the first time, I felt the cold, creeping tendrils of pure, unadulterated terror. My reflection stared back at me, a stranger in my own skin, and I had no idea what was happening to me. The next 48 hours were a blur of pure, gut-wrenching panic. I called in sick to work, claiming a stomach bug, and locked myself in my room. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, the image from the mirror burned itself onto the back of my eyelids. I was a freak, a monster from a B-movie. My body was staging a rebellion, and I was losing. My laptop became my only connection to the outside world, a portal to a terrifying rabbit hole of information. My hands shook as I typed the first search query, man growing breasts. The results came back instantly. Gynecomastia, a condition caused by a hormone imbalance. Okay, that was something. A medical term. Manageable. But as I read further, the descriptions didn't quite fit. Gynecomastia was often just fatty tissue, or it happened during puberty or to older men. My changes were happening too fast, and they felt different. The articles mentioned tenderness, but this was more than that. It felt like my body was actively building something new. My searches became more specific, more desperate. Sudden emotional changes in men. Skin softening male. Muscle loss and breast growth. The algorithms churned. And then a new acronym appeared on my screen, HRT, Hormone Replacement Therapy. I clicked on a link to a forum, my heart hammering against my ribs. The page was a sea of blue and pink, a community for transgender individuals. I read stories from transgender women describing the effects of taking estrogen. They spoke of softer skin, of emotional shifts, of their sense of smell changing. They described the exact same budding and tenderness in their chests that I was experiencing. Every post was like a hammer blow, cracking my denial into smaller and smaller pieces. This couldn't be happening. I wasn't transgender. I was James. I liked women. I watched football. I worked in finance. My life was a straight line. Not some confusing, winding path. But how could this be happening to me? Without my consent? Then, a memory surfaced. Sharp and unwelcome Marcus, leaning against the kitchen doorframe. That smug, knowing smirk on his face. The fancy single-origin coffee. The bitter, sweet, chemical taste. A cold dread. Heavier and more profound than the initial shock. Settled in my stomach. Could he? Would he? It was insane. It was something out of a comic book. But what other explanation was there, I thought back over the past 2 months? He was always asking how I was feeling. If I'd noticed anything different. At the time, I'd found it annoying. Now, it seemed sinister. I searched again. Estrogen in food. Spiking drink with hormones. I found articles, mostly sensationalized tabloid trash, but also a few forum posts from people claiming it had happened to them. It was possible. The suspicion hardened into a certainty. Marcus had been poisoning me. For weeks, maybe months. The thought was so monstrous I almost couldn't process it. Why, what had I ever done to him? We weren't friends, but I never thought he hated me. I couldn't go to the police. What would I say? My roommate is turning me into a woman with his coffee. They'd think I was insane. I couldn't tell my family or friends. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I was trapped, alone with this horrifying secret that was literally reshaping my body. One night, unable to bear the confines of my room any longer, I did something I couldn't explain. My reflection was my enemy, a constant reminder of my helplessness, but a strange, morbid curiosity was starting to bloom in the barren soil of my fear. I needed to see. I needed to understand. I dug through my drawers until I found an old workout tank top. One I hadn't worn in years because it was too tight. It was a compression-style shirt, designed to cling to every contour. My hands trembled as I pulled it over my head. The fabric stretched taut across my torso, and there it was, undeniable. The tank top outlined the soft swell of my new chest perfectly. There was no hiding it, no explaining it away. It created a smooth, curved silhouette. I stared at myself in the dim light of my bedroom. a war raging inside me. Part of me was disgusted, horrified by this feminine shape imposed on my male frame, but another part of me, a quiet, treacherous whisper in the back of my mind, was intrigued. The shape, however alien, had a certain completeness to it. The whisper grew louder a few days later. Marcus was gone for the weekend, visiting some art collective upstate. The silence in the apartment was a relief, but it also left me alone with my thoughts. I found myself wandering into his perpetually messy bedroom, not sure what I was looking for. And then I saw it. Tucked under his bed was a cardboard box. The name Elise was scrawled on the side in black marker. Elise was his ex-girlfriend. They'd had a messy breakup right before I moved in, and apparently she'd left a bunch of her stuff behind. My heart started beating faster. It was a crazy idea, a stupid, reckless idea. But I couldn't stop myself. I pulled the box out. It was filled with old clothes, faded band t-shirts, a couple of sweaters, and a pair of black leggings. I picked up the leggings. They were made of a soft, worn cotton spandex blend. On a pure impulse, I took off my baggy jeans and pulled them on. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. My jeans were rigid, structured. The leggings were like a second skin. They clung to my legs, which seemed to look slenderer, smoother in the soft fabric. They hugged my hips and backside in a way that felt utterly foreign. I looked down at myself, at my legs encased in the soft black material. My body felt different, softer. Next, I grabbed one of the t-shirts. It was a grey shirt for a band I didn't recognize. It was much larger than the tank top, but it was cut differently than a man's shirt. The sleeves were shorter, the neckline wider. I pulled it on. It draped over me, the soft cotton falling gently over the curves of my chest. It didn't hide them, but it didn't accentuate them either. It just accommodated them. I stood there in the middle of Marcus's room, wearing his ex-girlfriend's clothes. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. The anger at Marcus was a burning fire in my chest. But underneath it all, a new feeling was surfacing. It was a quiet, unsettling sense of comfort. It was more than just the softness of the fabric. It was the way the clothes fit this new, unfamiliar body. It felt right. The feeling was terrifying because it felt like a betrayal of the man I was supposed to be. But it was also a profound relief, a moment of peace in the middle of a hurricane. I felt a tremor run through my body, a strange mix of revulsion and fascination. I looked at myself, not in a mirror, but just down at my own body. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the whisper in my mind wasn't one of fear. It was a question, a quiet, terrifying, exhilarating question. Who am I becoming? The question haunted me. For a week, I lived a double life. By day, I was James, the quiet analyst, hiding my changing body under baggy sweaters and a forced scowl of concentration. By night, alone in my locked room, I would pull out Elise's old leggings and t-shirt. I'd just sit in them, reading or scrolling on my phone. The simple act of wearing them became a strange ritual, a secret comfort that both terrified and soothed me. The feeling of the soft fabric against my increasingly sensitive skin was a guilty pleasure, a confirmation of the changes I was so desperate to deny. One night, after a particularly grueling day of pretending to be fine, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, the phantom sensation of the leggings still on my skin, my mind racing. The denial was gone. Replaced by a stark reality, my body was female now. At least in some ways. It was a puberty I hadn't asked for, and I had none of the tools to navigate it. The tenderness in my chest had become a constant, nagging ache, made worse by the friction of my coarse undershirts. I was living in a state of perpetual discomfort, both physical and emotional. A reckless, desperate idea began to form in the sleepless chaos of my mind. If this was my reality now, I couldn't keep hiding from it. I couldn't keep pretending these changes weren't happening. I had to face it. I had to understand it. The decision solidified around 3 a.m, born of exhaustion and a sliver of defiant curiosity. I was going to a mall, and I was going to the women's department. The next day, a Saturday, I drove to a large shopping mall in the next town over, where no one would know me. I wore my baggiest hoodie and a baseball cap pulled down low, my heart thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every person who passed me felt like an accuser. I imagined them seeing right through my disguise, their eyes boring into my chest, knowing my secret. The paranoia was so thick I could taste it. I found a department store and slipped inside, heading for the escalators to the second floor, where the women's clothing was. The department was an overwhelming assault on the senses. Bright colors, soft lighting, the faint scent of perfume, racks and racks of fabrics I couldn't name, styles I didn't understand. It was a foreign country, and I didn't speak the language. I felt like an intruder, a spy in the house of femininity. I drifted aimlessly, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying to look casual. My eyes landed on the lingerie section. It was a maze of lace and silk in every color imaginable, and there, displayed on pristine white mannequins, were bras. My breath hitched. This was what I had come for. The item that represented the most significant and terrifying change in my body. But the thought of actually touching one, let alone buying one, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. "Can I help you find something?" The voice was soft, and it made me jump a foot in the air. I spun around to see a young woman, probably early 20s, with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Sophie. "Oh, no, I'm just looking," I stammered, my face flushing hot. "For my, girlfriend." It was a pathetic lie, and we both knew it. Sophie gave me a small, gentle smile. "Of course, it can be a little overwhelming, if you know her size. I can point you in the right direction." My mind went blank. Size, I had no idea. How could I? I just mumbled something about not being sure and started to back away, desperate to escape. "You know," she said, her voice dropping a little. "Sometimes it's just easier to try things on to get the right fit. The dressing rooms are right over there. No one will bother you." She didn't wink. She didn't nudge. But her meaning was crystal clear. She saw me, not as a creep or a joke, but as someone who needed help. Her simple, non-judgmental acceptance was a lifeline. Bolstered by her kindness, I took a shaky breath. "Okay," I whispered. She led me through the racks, her presence a shield against my own anxiety. "Let's start with something simple and comfortable," she said, pulling a few soft cup, seamless t-shirt bras from a display, and maybe some clothes to try on over them, just to see how it all feels together. She grabbed a pair of dark-wash skinny jeans and a simple, silky navy blue blouse. Her efficiency was a blessing, saving me from the paralysis of choice. She handed the items to me and gestured toward a vacant dressing room. Inside the small, curtained space, my heart was racing. I hung the clothes on the hook and looked at the bra in my hands. It was a plain, beige thing, but it felt like a bomb. This was it, the point of no return. With trembling fingers, I took off my hoodie and t-shirt. I stood there in the harsh lighting, looking at my chest. Then, I took the bra and tried to put it on. It was a clumsy, awkward struggle. I had no idea how the clasps worked, fumbling with the tiny hooks behind my back. After a minute of pathetic contorting, I gave up, spun the bra around, clasped it in the front, and then twisted it back into place, pulling the straps over my shoulders. The moment the bra settled into place, a strange sensation shot through me. The band was snug around my ribcage, a firm, constant pressure that was surprisingly grounding. The cups, which I had been so terrified of, gently enclosed the sensitive tissue of my breasts. It wasn't a sexual feeling. It was a feeling of relief, of support. The constant dull ache was lessened, contained. For the first time in weeks, my chest didn't feel like a chaotic, painful mess. It felt managed. It felt right. Still reeling from the sensation, I pulled on the skinny jeans. They were a struggle to get over my hips, and the stretchy denim clung to my legs and rear in a way that was both shocking and intriguing. I looked in the mirror. My legs looked longer, my hips subtly curved. The fit was so different from the baggy men's jeans I had worn my entire life. Finally, I slipped the blouse over my head. The silky material cascaded over my shoulders and chest, draping softly over the new, smooth contour created by the bra. I buttoned it up and turned to face the full-length mirror. And I froze. The person staring back at me wasn't James. Not really. But it wasn't a man in a woman's blouse, either. The image in the mirror was coherent. The soft lines of the blouse, the fitted shape of the jeans, the gentle, supported curve of my chest, it all worked together. The reflection didn't look like a costume. It looked like me. A version of me I had never seen before. A version that made a strange, shocking kind of sense. All the horror, the fear, the confusion, it hadn't vanished. But in that moment, looking at my reflection, a new emotion pushed its way through the chaos. It was a fragile, tentative flicker of recognition. I saw not a monster or a mistake, but a possibility. I saw a person who looked more complete, more whole, than the man who had walked into the store just 20 minutes earlier. A single tear escaped and traced a hot path down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or of fear. It was a tear of profound, earth-shattering confusion and a tiny, terrifying spark of hope. This was the moment the person I was started to die, and someone else, someone I didn't even have a name for yet, began to be born. In the sterile, quiet dressing room of a suburban department store, the seeds of felicity were sown. I bought the clothes, all of them. Walking up to the register where Sophie was waiting, I felt a strange mix of terror and triumph. I slid the items onto the counter, my face burning, avoiding eye contact. She just smiled, rang them up without a word, and folded them neatly into a bag. "Have a great day," she said, her voice laced with the same quiet kindness as before. That small act of normalcy felt like a monumental gift. The drive home was surreal. The bag of clothes sat on the passenger seat like a tangible piece of evidence from another life. The anger I felt toward Marcus, which had been simmering beneath the fear and confusion, now began to boil. The fragile hope I'd felt in the dressing room was real. But it was hope born from a violation. He had done this to me. He had taken my life, my body, my identity, and twisted it into something I didn't recognize. All for some sick, petty game. When I got back to the apartment, his car was in the driveway. He was home. My blood ran cold for a second. then hot. This was it. No more hiding. No more pretending. I needed answers. I needed him to know what he'd done. I walked in and slammed the door behind me. He was in the living room, sketching in a notebook, a half-empty mug of coffee on the table beside him. He looked up, a lazy smile on his face. "Hey, you were out for a while." I didn't say anything. I walked over to the coffee table, my hands shaking with rage, and threw the shopping bag down. It landed with a soft crump, the navy blue blouse spilling partly out. His eyes flickered down to the bag, then back up to my face. The lazy smile faltered, replaced by that same smug, knowing smirk I remembered from that first morning. "Looks like you had a productive day," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. That was it. The dam of my control broke. "What did you do to me?" I roared, my voice cracking. "The coffee! Marcus! What the hell did you put in the coffee?" He leaned back on the couch, entirely unfazed by my outburst. He actually chuckled, a low, ugly sound. "Took you long enough to figure it out," he said calmly. He closed his sketchbook and set it aside. "I was starting to think you were completely oblivious." The casualness of his confession knocked the wind out of me. "Why?" I choked out, the single word full of a universe of pain and confusion. "Why would you do this?" He finally stood up, stretching like he didn't have a care in the world. "Consider it a little social experiment," he said, walking toward the kitchen. "A bit of performance art, if you will. You remember Elise?" Right. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. Elise. His ex. I had a vague memory from when I first moved in. A drunken night, a party, a stupid, meaningless hookup with her. After she and Marcus had a massive fight. I'd felt guilty about it for a week and then forgot it ever happened. "You slept with my girlfriend." "James," Marcus said, his voice turning cold. "In my apartment. I thought that deserved a little more than a simple, 'sorry, man.' I wanted some payback, something creative." He leaned against the counter, right where he'd stood all those weeks ago. "So, I got my hands on some estrogen, just a little at first, ground up in your coffee every morning. I figured, you'd start feeling weird, maybe get a little emotional, a little soft. You'd freak out, go to a doctor, and I'd have a good laugh knowing I'd messed with you in a way you could never prove." My mind was reeling. This was his motive, a petty, cruel revenge for a forgotten one-night stand. He pushed off the counter and walked back toward me, circling the coffee table. His eyes dropped to the bag of clothes again, and his smirk returned, wider and meaner this time. "But the funniest thing happened," he continued, his voice a low taunt. "You didn't freak out. Not really. I kept waiting for you to confront me, to lose your mind, but you just let it happen. You got moodier. You started wearing baggy clothes. You just adapted. I have to admit, I was impressed. It made me wonder." He stopped right in front of me, his gaze intense and mocking. "Maybe you never really wanted to be a man, James." The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I opened my mouth to shout, to deny it, to tell him he was a monster and that he was wrong. So deeply, fundamentally wrong. But the words wouldn't come. My throat closed up. Because in that single, horrifying moment of clarity, a part of me knew he was right. My mind flashed back to the dressing room, to the reflection in the mirror that looked more whole, more correct, than anything I had seen before, to the profound, bone-deep comfort of Elise's leggings, to a lifetime of feeling slightly out of sync, of never quite fitting into the mold of masculinity that was expected of me. A feeling I had always suppressed, always ignored. Marcus had intended to humiliate me, to break me with a cruel joke, but the bastard had stumbled, blindly and maliciously, onto the one truth about myself I had never, ever allowed myself to face. He thought he was unmaking a man, but he had inadvertently cracked open the shell I'd been hiding in my entire life. The anger was still there, a white-hot inferno in my soul for what he had done, for the violation of my body and my trust. But now, it was mixed with a terrifying, dizzying, and profound sense of revelation. He had forced this on me, but this forced transformation hadn't created something new. It had awakened something that was already there, buried so deep I didn't even know it existed. I stood there, speechless, in the ruins of my old life. Marcus watched me, waiting for the denial, the explosion he expected. When it didn't come, his smirk finally faded, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He had wanted to destroy me, but he had ended up giving me the most terrifying and liberating gift of my life. He had shown me the truth. The confrontation with Marcus left a strange silence in its wake. He started avoiding me, the smugness gone, replaced by an uncomfortable uncertainty. He had expected a fight, not a stunned, silent revelation. The power dynamic between us had irrevocably shifted. He had been the puppet master, but now he seemed to realize he had no idea what strings he had actually been pulling. For me, the days that followed were a period of intense, terrifying introspection. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I could try to scramble back to the familiar, solid ground of being James, try to find a doctor who could reverse the effects, try to piece my old life back together. Or I could jump. I could leap into the vast, unknown abyss of who I was becoming. I spent hours in my room, the clothes from the mall laid out on my bed. I'd try them on, not with the furtive curiosity of before, but with a new sense of deliberate exploration. I'd stand in front of the mirror and just look, trying to reconcile the person staring back at me with the man I had always been. The anger at Marcus was still a sharp, painful stone in my gut. But the question of what to do next was entirely my own. He had started this journey for me, but I was the one who had to decide where it would lead. The decision came one afternoon when I realized I hadn't thought of myself as James for 3 full days. The name felt like an ill-fitting suit, something I used to wear, but that no longer belonged to me. The path back was an illusion. There was no going back. There was only forward. My first step was to reclaim my own body. I spent hours researching online and found a clinic downtown that specialized in LGBTQ+ healthcare and informed consent hormone therapy. Making the phone call was one of the hardest things I've ever done. My voice was a choked whisper when I explained my situation, leaving out the part about Marcus. I just said I was transgender and wanted to begin HRT. The doctor was a kind, professional woman who listened without judgment. She explained the effects of estrogen and spironolactone, the anti-androgen I would need to take. It was the same list of changes my body was already undergoing. But this time, it wasn't a secret poisoning. It was a choice. My choice. Walking out of that clinic with a legitimate prescription in my hand felt like taking my first breath after nearly drowning. I was finally taking control. With the medical side of things handled, a new, more personal quest began finding a name. James was a ghost. I needed a name for the person I saw in the mirror, the person who felt more real every day. One evening, I was sitting in front of my mirror, experimenting with a cheap makeup kit I'd bought online. My hand was shaky as I tried to apply a thin line of eyeliner. It was clumsy and smeared, but it changed my face, making my eyes look larger, softer. I wiped it off and tried again. As I worked, I started saying names out loud, whispering them to my reflection. Jessica, Sarah, Emily. They were nice names, but they felt like someone else's. Then, a word popped into my head, not from a list, but from the feeling that was slowly, tentatively, starting to grow inside me. It was a feeling of quiet, unexpected joy. Felicity. It meant intense happiness. I said it aloud. Felicity. It fit. It felt like my own. My reflections seemed to agree. I looked at the woman with the smudged eyeliner and the soft, hopeful eyes. And I saw her. I saw Felicity. Tears streamed down my face, streaking the makeup. But they were tears of release. It felt like I was being born for a second time. At 29 years old. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of self-discovery. A second puberty on fast forward. Each day was a lesson in becoming myself. Makeup became a ritual. I spent hours watching online tutorials, learning the difference between foundation and concealer, how to blend eyeshadow, the right way to apply lipstick so it didn't look like a clown's smile. My first successful attempt at a clean eyeliner wing felt like a bigger accomplishment than any financial report I had ever filed. It was an act of creation, of painting my true face onto the canvas of my skin. I started training my voice. At first, it was deeply embarrassing. I'd lock myself in my room and read articles aloud, trying to raise my pitch, to speak from my chest instead of my throat, to soften the masculine cadence I'd had my whole life. I sounded ridiculous, my voice cracking and wavering. But slowly, gradually, a new voice began to emerge. It was softer, gentler. It was my voice. Shopping for clothes was no longer a mission of terrified necessity, but an adventure of joyful expression. I learned my sizes. I discovered I loved the feel of soft knit sweaters and the freedom of A-line skirts. The day I bought my first dress was a monumental milestone. It was a simple, floral sundress, the kind of thing I'd seen on countless women but never dreamed of wearing. In the dressing room, I slipped it on. The soft cotton fabric skimmed over my body, the skirt swirling around my knees. I looked in the mirror and laughed, a bright, happy sound that belonged entirely to Felicity. I wore it out of the store, my head held high, feeling a mixture of dizzying self-consciousness and exhilarating confidence. Of course, the internal conflict didn't just vanish overnight. There were still moments of doubt, flashes of fear. I would catch my reflection unexpectedly and feel a jolt of unfamiliarity. I mourned the simplicity of my old life, the ease of moving through the world without question. But those moments became less frequent. They were drowned out by the rising tide of acceptance and peace. The constant tension that had lived in my shoulders for years began to melt away. I started smiling more, laughing more. The world seemed more vibrant, more colorful. I was no longer fighting myself, and the energy I had wasted on suppression was now free to be used on living. At work, I was still presenting as James, but the clock was ticking. I was becoming Felicity, inside and out. And soon, the whole world would have to meet her. The decision to come out at work was agonizing. My career was the one part of my old life that still felt stable. A pillar of normalcy in a sea of change. The thought of knocking it down terrified me. For a month, I lived in a state of suspended animation. Felicity at home. A ghost of James at the office. But it was exhausting. The lie was heavy, and the baggy men's clothes I wore to hide my developing figure felt like a suffocating costume. I couldn't live like that anymore. I scheduled a meeting with my department head and an HR representative. I practiced my speech for days, my heart pounding every time I thought about it. When the day came, I walked into the conference room, my hands clammy. I took a deep breath and told them the truth. I explained that I was a transgender woman, that I was undergoing a medical transition, and that from now on, I would be living and working as Felicity. The silence that followed was the longest minute of my life. I braced myself for confusion, for termination, for any number of horrible outcomes. Instead, the HR rep, a woman named Linda, gave me a calm, professional smile. "Thank you for telling us, Felicity," she said, using my name for the first time in a professional context. The sound of it in that sterile office environment was both jarring and deeply affirming. "We have policies in place to support transitioning employees. We'll send out a memo to the department, and we'll ensure you have everything you need to feel safe and respected here." The memo went out that Friday. Monday morning, I walked into the office as Felicity for the first time. I wore a conservative but stylish navy blue dress, subtle makeup, and my hair, which I had been growing out, was styled neatly. It felt like walking onto a stage under 1,000 spotlights. I could feel the stares. I could hear the whispers stop as I walked by. Most people just gave me awkward, tight-lipped smiles and scurried back to their desks. The one bright spot in that terrifying day was Donna. Donna was a senior analyst who had always been friendly in a casual, office kitchen kind of way, while I was cowering at my desk, pretending to be absorbed in a spreadsheet. She walked over. "I love that dress." "Felicity," she said, her voice warm and completely normal. "That color is fantastic on you. You want to grab lunch later?" I was so shocked I could only nod. That simple invitation, that act of treating me like a person and not a spectacle, was an anchor in the storm. At lunch, she didn't ask probing or invasive questions. She just talked about work, about a funny movie she saw, and offered to help me navigate the unspoken rules of corporate female fashion. Donna quickly became more than a colleague. She became my first real friend as Felicity, my guide and my confidant. A few months later, Donna convinced me to go to a cross-company networking event. My first instinct was to say no. The idea of navigating a crowded room of strangers, of introducing myself over and over, was daunting. But Donna insisted it would be good for me. "You're a brilliant analyst, Felicity," she said. "You just need to let people see you." So I went. I wore a chic black pantsuit that made me feel powerful and a little bit of red lipstick for courage. The event was as awkward as I'd feared. A blur of handshakes and business cards. I was starting to fade into a corner when a man approached me. "I don't think we've met. I'm Daniel," he said, extending a hand. He had a kind smile and warm, intelligent eyes. He was from a partner tech firm. "Felicity," I said, shaking his hand. We started talking about work, about a new piece of financial software his company was developing. The conversation was easy, natural. He listened intently when I spoke, and he had a laugh that made me laugh. Too, he didn't look at me with pity or morbid curiosity. He just looked at me like I was an interesting woman he wanted to get to know. At the end of the night, he walked me to my car. "I'd really like to see you again," he said. his smile a little shy now. Maybe for dinner, somewhere with no business cards involved. My heart did a little flip. I'd like that, I said, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across my face. Our first date was magical. He took me to a quiet Italian restaurant, and we talked for hours about our families, our dreams, our embarrassing childhood stories. There was an undeniable chemistry between us, a spark of connection I hadn't felt with anyone before. As he walked me home, a cool breeze picked up. Without a word, he took off his suit jacket and draped it over my shoulders. It was a simple, chivalrous gesture, but for me, it was everything. It was a moment of being seen, of being cared for, of being treated as the woman I was. I blushed, a real, honest-to-God blush, and felt a surge of happiness so pure it almost hurt. We went on several more dates. Each one was better than the last. I was falling for him. Hard. But with that came a growing knot of anxiety in my stomach. He didn't know about my past. He knew Felicity, the confident, witty woman from the finance world. He didn't know James. The secret felt like a wall between us, and I knew I had to tear it down, even if it meant everything would come crashing down with it. One night, after a wonderful dinner at his place, we were sitting on his couch. I knew this was the moment. My hands were trembling. My mouth was dry. "Daniel," I started, my voice barely a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." He turned to face me, his expression open and concerned. "You can tell me anything. Felicity." I took a shaky breath and the words tumbled out. I told him everything, about my life before, about my name, about how my transition started. I told him I was transgender. I finished, and the silence in the room was deafening. I couldn't bring myself to look at him. I just stared at my hands, twisted in my lap, bracing for the rejection, for the disgust. This was the moment people like me feared, the moment a potential future could be shattered. He was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then, I felt his hand gently cover mine. I finally looked up. He wasn't looking at me with anger or confusion. He was just looking at me, his brown eyes soft with an emotion I couldn't quite read. Then he smiled, a small, slow smile. "Okay," he said softly. "Thank you for telling me." He squeezed my hand. "It doesn't change anything. I like you. Felicity, all of you. The person I've been getting to know for the past month. That's who I'm falling for. Not your past, not your body, but you." The relief was so immense, it felt like my bones were dissolving. The tears I had been holding back finally fell, hot and fast. But they weren't tears of fear anymore. They were tears of overwhelming, unbelievable joy. He didn't just accept me. He affirmed me. In that moment, sitting on his couch with his hand in mine, I knew I hadn't just found a boyfriend. I had found someone who saw the real me, the whole me, and loved what he saw. Telling Daniel the truth, and his unwavering acceptance, was the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. It solidified a sense of self-worth in me that was no longer fragile or dependent on anyone else's approval. With him by my side, I felt strong enough to finally close the first, painful chapter of my new life. That meant confronting my past, and that meant leaving the apartment I shared with Marcus. I found a new place, a small but sunny one-bedroom closer to my office, and started packing. The day I was set to move, I knew I had to have one last conversation with Marcus. I found him in his studio, surrounded by his half-finished canvases. He looked up when I entered, a guarded expression on his face. We had barely spoken in months, coexisting like ghosts in the space that held the origins of my transformation. There was no anger left in me, just a strange, quiet sense of finality. "I'm moving out today," I said simply. He nodded, not looking surprised. "Yeah, I figured." I stood there for a moment, looking at the man who had, through an act of profound cruelty, accidentally set me free. "What you did to me was monstrous." "Marcus," I said, my voice steady and clear, "you violated me in a way I'll never forget. You tried to ruin my life for the pettiest reason imaginable." He flinched, but didn't argue. He just stared at the floor. "But I need you to know something." I continued. "I don't forgive you. I don't think I ever can. But I'm also not going to carry any hatred for you. Because in a twisted, messed up way, you gave me a gift. You forced me to see a truth about myself that I would have spent my entire life running from. You thought you were destroying James. But you ended up introducing me to Felicity, and I wouldn't trade being her for anything in the world." I turned to leave, my box of belongings in my arms. "So thank you," I said over my shoulder, the words feeling strange and powerful on my tongue. "And goodbye." I walked out of that apartment and never looked back, leaving Marcus alone with the consequences of his bizarre, failed revenge. My new life began. Daniel helped me move into my new apartment. And soon, my boxes were being unpacked at his place instead. We fell into a beautiful rhythm of domestic life. We cooked dinners together, argued about which movie to watch, and fell asleep in each other's arms. He loved me for who I was, completely and without reservation. He celebrated my victories, comforted me through my moments of doubt, and became my biggest champion. One Sunday morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee brewing. I walked into the kitchen to find Daniel standing by the counter, a smile on his face, holding out a steaming mug for me. I took it, the warmth spreading through my hands. For a fleeting second, the memory of another man, in another kitchen, handing me a very different cup of coffee flashed through my mind. The taste of that bitter, tainted brew was a ghost on my tongue. I took a sip of the coffee Daniel had made. It was rich, warm, and perfectly, wonderfully normal. It was just coffee, a simple, sweet truth in a simple, happy moment. I looked at Daniel, his face illuminated by the morning sun streaming through the window, and a profound sense of peace washed over me. The journey had started with a bitter taste, an act of poison meant to cause pain, but it had led me here, to this moment of sweet, uncomplicated love. It had led me home. That night, I sat down to write in my journal, something I had started doing to process the whirlwind of the past year. My pen moved quickly across the page. My name is Felicity. For a long time, I thought my story was a tragedy. I thought it was about what someone did to me, about a life that was stolen. But I was wrong. My story isn't about how I was changed. It's about how I became myself. The path was agonizing, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But it led me here. It led me to a life where I am loved, where I am whole, where I finally feel like I belong in my own skin. I don't regret the journey, because it brought me to me. I have found my happiness, and I will live every moment of it, fully and without apology, as the woman I was always meant to be.